and gentlemen, Director of Applied History, Dr. Tom Leary.
Thank you, Jacob. I would like very much to welcome you all to this event at the conclusion of the semester, which will showcase the work of several of the classes that have been over the past several months applying their skills and energy in the area of community-based projects that have taken history out of the library and put it into the rest of the world. That's been our hope as part of the YSU Applied History program. I think we've been very fortunate that some very dedicated students have chosen that course of study, and you will see the results of their work this afternoon. We'd like to start with the project, as I said, that did emerge from events that were taking place in the community of Youngstown as well. And to do that, I'd like to introduce one of our principal collaborators all through projects that have taken place over this past year, Sarah Wilschak.
Hi, everybody. My name is Sarah Wilschak. Yeah. I am Executive Director of Congregation Ohed Beth Shalom. But in 2019, I started as the inaugural and only Executive Director of Congregation Road of Shalom, which is a synagogue on Wood Park with the big dome. I did not grow up there. I grew up going to the Jewish congregation Alameth in Liberty on Logan. And I decided during the winter it'd be a great time to get to know my congregants. So in winter of 2020, I found all of our archives in a water closet in the basement, decided that March 15th, I would dump them out in a room, and March 20th or 13th, the world shut down. And so I had reached out to YSU and Dr. LeBenz for some guidance, as well as Dr. Bonham. We had looked at even doing an AmeriCorps person in the building, and through fate, I was connected with the Applied History Project and Dr. Leary, and we started our first year class with Jacob and Hannah, and they created a Road to Shalom archive. It was incredible what we didn't know about ourselves and what we found. For example, letters to previous rabbis' daughters, where she would call Theodore Roosevelt teddy bear. And I mean, like some crazy things in our archives. But as we were moving forward, at the same time, our Jewish community was continuing to shrink and trying to find a sustainable model. And the ultimate outcome of that sustainable model is that we merged with a congregation that was in Boardman, Olivsedic, November of 2021. And throughout Hannah and Jacob's time with me, we realized that this was inevitable, and what can we do next? And once that merger took place, and as I was seeing things kind of come to happen, Dr. Leary and I talked, and we decided that it would be a really great thing to continue the partnership. That's usually how it is. And we partnered with the Applied History class this time around and created a timeline and an understanding of our Jewish community. We focused on Open Tzedek, Road of Shalom, and Temple Beth Israel that merged with Road of Shalom in 2013. And the goal was to show really how all three of our stories created the current Ohed Beth Shalom. We're having, as you can imagine, there's political differences. We have Road of Shalom, which was founded in 1867, and Tzedek from 1922, with another congregation from Pennsylvania. No one wants to lose their identity. So the goal of this project is really to take all of our histories and show how there's a shared history that really created who we are today. And that it's not, we're moving into the Road of building, which we are. We stayed on Elm Street. We did officially change our name to Ohed Beth Shalom, but we're staying on Elm Street, which is a really big deal to the Road of congregation. The building was built in 1914 for that purpose. And so we've been there. We checked it and we didn't want to lose that. But it's great. And so that's kind of where we were. And at that, I think I'm going to pass it off to the class to talk about what they found and anything else. I don't know before I step back. And unfortunately, I have to go because I have to take my kids out. If anyone has any questions for me before I disappear. Perfect.
Stand.
Hello, everybody. So there was 3 other people in our class, so we're just 2 of the group that was able to put these exhibits together. So what you see on the screen here is just one of the panels. And so unfortunately, well, not unfortunately, but we created Google panels and created our house as congregation on special. And so what we hear, many of the congregations started asking questions about them, and they really served the purpose that we kind of intended them to. And also, if you're curious to see them, they are also up in Mod Library on the 5th floor, on a smaller scale, but we do not have the final copies here to show you, but as Sarah kind of said, this class kind of grew out of the archives and out of this merger. And really, we try to highlight each congregation's unique history and unique role in the region, in Youngstown and the Honey Valley and everything. And so this one down here, and one thing we tried to keep in mind throughout the whole process was that it's not just the Jewish population that was defined, it's the whole population of the Honey Valley. And so this timeline kind of shows that the growth and the decline of Youngstown. And so it's important to think of that in the context of the greater realities of the region. So we try to kind of highlight that and to highlight each congregation's unique role in the Jewish community in the region. So a lot of interesting things. Like I said, unfortunately, we don't have the final product here. But that's up to Brooke.
Okay, yeah, so as Mitchell stated, so me and him, we were 2 of 5 students total in the class who researched and developed these panels with the assistance of Hannah Klasick, Sarah, Jacob Harbour, Ryan Johnquest of Johnquest Designs, Dr. Lebenz, and some of the congregants of OHF Beth Shalom, who not only helped us design the panels, but gather information as well, and really help us figure out what we wanted to include, what we didn't want to include, and how pretty much to get our message across the panels that we have. I believe there's a total of 5, so as Mitchell stated earlier, the copies of the panels are up on the 5th floor of Mod Library in the exhibit center, and then the actual panels are at OHF Beth Shalom. I don't know when those will be showcased, but they'll be showcased soon. So what each of the students did was gather more information on the separate congregations that merged to initially form OHF Beth Shalom in 2022. So this congregation, for instance, OHF Tzedek, I researched and gathered some of the photos from their archives that were transferred to OHF's building around March. I contacted some of the congregants who went to OHF Tzedek before the merger, and they helped me gather some more information and clarify questions I had. But these 5 panels are a product of our 17-week course, Dr. Leary's Applied History Practicum class. So I want to say again, thanks to all those who helped us develop these. As I said, Sarah, Hannah, Jacob, Brian Johnquest, Dr. Lebenz, Dr. Leary for overseeing the development of these panels. Okay. Yeah, so these panels will, as I said, are on the 5th floor of Mod Library, but then they're also located at the OHF Beth Shalom Temple on Elm Street. So, thank you. If I haven't introduced myself earlier, my name is Brooke Wagner. I am a graduate student from YSU and a graduate assistant intern here at the Steel Museum. In commemoration of the Steel Museum's 30th anniversary, I developed the digital exhibit, Youngstown Historical Center of Industry and Labor, 30 Years of Memory, Identity, and Community, which is now available on the Steel Museum's website. But before I begin discussing the exhibit itself, I want to start with some background information. The production of iron in the valley began in 1802 with the Heaton furnace, when the Heaton brothers built the Hopewell furnace on Yellow Creek in Struthers. From there, and with the completion of the Pennsylvania and Ohio Canal and numerous railroads, the demand for iron increased, and the valley witnessed the growth of the iron industry. Numerous mills, such as the James Ward and Company, the Brown Bonnell and Company, Briar Hill Iron and Coal Company, the Girard Iron Company, and the William B. Pollock Company, were founded under the goal to meet the need for the demand of iron and to help the valley prosper. By the turn of the 20th century, steel replaced iron. In the following years, we see the rise of steel mills. So these included Republic Steel Company, 1899, Youngstown Sheet Tube, 1900, and Warren's Trumbull Steel Company, 1912. By the end of World War I, the city of Youngstown became one of the largest steel producers in America, and then by World War II, the Mahoning Valley was producing 10% of national steel production. However, this growth also brought about many challenges. While steel factories thrived, poor working conditions and pay wages of steelworkers brought about numerous strikes. The strike of 1916, which saw the destruction of many businesses on the east side of Youngstown, resulted in wage increases for steelworkers. In the Little Steel Strike of 1937, the demand of workers, represented by the Congress of Industrial Organizations, were refused by the little steel companies, which included Youngstown Sheet and Tube and Republic Steel. It was not until 1941 that these companies recognized steel unions. In 1952, unions demanded an increase in wages for its steel workers, and again, this demand was refused. A strike broke out. In response, President Truman seized control of the steel industries. The strike of 1952 brought about the Supreme Court case of Youngstown Sheet and Tube Company versus Sawyer, which made the president's seizure of the companies unlawful. The largest challenge, however, that steelworkers faced occurred on September 19, 1977, a day known as Black Monday. Youngstown Sheet and Tube announced it would be closing its Campbell Works, immediately laying off 5,000 workers. Between 1979 and 1981, Youngstown Sheet and Tube, Briar Hill Works, U.S. Steel, and Republic Steel announced they too would be ceasing operations. Thousands of jobs were lost as a result of these closures. Following the closure of the Campbell Works, the Ecumenical Coalition of the Mahoning Valley was formed by community members and religious leaders who desired to reopen the Campbell Works under community worker ownership. The Save Our Valley campaign was launched in February of 1978 to raise funds to help with this goal. However, in March of 1979, the plan to reopen the Campbell Works was rejected by the Economic Development Administration, and in April, the coalition closed the campaign. After 43 years, the Youngstown community continues to feel the effects of Black Monday. Despite the establishment of McDonald Steel in 1981 and Valorex Steel in 2002, which continued to manufacture steel products, the golden years of production in the Mahoning Valley remain long in the past. However, the memory of this past would not be possible if it were not for the Youngstown Historical Center of Industry and Labor. Throughout the semester, I researched the history of the museum and how its mission has changed over the past 30 years. What I have gathered has been compiled into this digital exhibit, which is available, as I said earlier, on the museum's website. The original proposal for the Steel Museum was developed by the Ohio Historical Society, which is now known as Ohio History Connection, following the closure of the steel mills in the late 1970s. When discussing the reason for the museum, the proposal argued, quote, "The historical development of the Mahoning Valley not only parallels the historical development of the American iron and steel industry, it is one of its most vital segments. Despite the historical and contemporary importance of the iron and steel industry, few Americans know much about it. Few of us are knowledgeable about the size, operations, or historical origins of this vital part of our nation." End quote. The proposed museum will need around 30,000 square feet, and its current site on Wood Street was selected. With the help of Senator Harry Meschel, who had previously worked in the steel mills, $4.3 million was collected by the Ohio General Assembly for the museum's construction, which began in 1986 and was completed in 1989. Designed by world-renowned architect Michael Graves, the design of the museum pays homage to the valley's industrial past, with two smokestack-like structures on the rear, each side representing a steel mill from a different period, and the Archives Rotunda, which reflects the inside of a blast furnace. The Steel Museum opened to the public on June 27, 1992, with its mission to preserve, interpret, and share the industrial and labor history of the valley with others. After 30 years, the museum continues to play a significant role in the community. Today, the Steel Museum also serves as a learning lab for YSU students, sponsors 2 internships, and provides various volunteer opportunities. Provides programming services to various groups of people, including students and adults on the autistic spectrum, students and adults with special needs, developmentally challenged individuals, individuals with memory loss or dementia, and foreign-speaking individuals. These services include virtual tours in Spanish, with current work also being done to expand the museum's foreign language and impaired hearing outreach, and the Sparking Memories program, which provides specially designed tours, interactive artifact exploration, and PowerPoint programs to stimulate memories with those suffering from dementia or Alzheimer's. The museum has also received funding for visits to skilled nursing facilities to provide programs, as well as to provide transportation, admission, and programming to underserved schools. The programs that are offered at the museum are the result of various partnerships with other organizations, including YSU's Gerontology Department to create the Sparking Memories program, the Excellence Training Center to create productions of tools used in educational activities, school tours, and Silly Science Sunday, YSU's World Languages and Cultures Department for the creation of foreign language tours, and YSU's Democrats, YSU Center for Judaic and Holocaust Studies, YSU Nursing, YSU Working Class Studies, and YSU's American Studies to host speakers and events. It is evident that the Steel Museum has accomplished much in its past 30 years, and I personally cannot wait to see what it does in the next 30. I hope you all enjoy this digital exhibit. Thank you.
Another student from the Road to Shalom Ohad Beth class, Becky's here. So our next project up, the Mackie map. You want to talk about the planning map?
You want to bring it up?
I'm looking.
Okay, I'll just start. So my name is Christopher Gillette, and I'm a undergraduate YSU student in his second year. This is Mackie Franks. He's also a history major like me, YSU undergraduate student. Both of us are history majors, and we came into this class, expecting it's an applied history, Dr. Leary's applied history class. Now, a lot of our focus normally was like history classes instead of lectures and essays, but this is research, which is normally what a historian would do out in the field. And what we were basically, when we first came in, we figured out what we were going to do. We found out about the old directories up in the library. Thanks to Ms. Bishop for helping us with that. She's right in the back there. Oh, Ms. Bishop. So we worked and we found 3 big years we kind of wanted to use: 1901, 1910, and 1950. Now, at first we were going to do some other years, but then Jacob kind of halfway through told us, "Oh yeah, those years like 1912, such. Those aren't the census years." It's like, oh shoot. Of course, it wasn't just Matthew and I working on this. We also had the help of Clark Bergenrother, who unfortunately cannot be with us today. He was busy with some work, but he also helped us out quite a lot with this. When we went through the directory, of course, we were trying to find names, and we were able to actually learn a lot about these people sometimes, because sometimes you have a family member there, and you look through the directory and you can match last names with addresses and such. And we could also look through the census records, and we could find a lot about their heritage, their family. We can make some educated guesses on what their lives were like and such. Of course, it wasn't all roses. Sometimes we had some hiccups with the information. I think if you want to talk a bit about that, Matthew.
So Chris introduced me earlier there. I'm Matthew Franks. I'm an undergrad here. So some of these hiccups we ran into there are because we're using very old microfilm of original written down documents there that are keeping these names of the census. Now, of course, when it comes down to that, none of these are printed. They're all written in script. So when you're looking at that, sometimes when they're photocopied there, when they're just copied down there, they're not exactly kept in the best condition. So it's hard to read those on top of the fact they're also having to read other people's handwriting. And also with that we were also looking at the directories there of different individual years and specific there in between the census. Now, of course, the issues we ran into with that there was because some of these books are very old, they are original books. So when you're looking at those, sometimes the binding would be falling apart. Sometimes there would even be pages missing. Remember Chris and I were looking at one point there where there was 5 pages in a row of different names that were completely missing from, I think, what was it, the 1901 directory. And because of that, there was a lot of information there that we were looking into that we could not find. So when they show some of these things on the website there, you'll run into things that are left blank because we just did not have any information to fill in those spaces with.
So to rewind a little bit, to tell you how this whole project got started, a few years ago, Dr. Leary and Dr. Leona went out to Republic Steel and Warren as they were tearing it down or about to tear it down and talked their way in to save some of the records. And so that whole big stack of whatever they could carry out and load up into a truck ended up in the basement here. And the museum has a volunteer by the name of Val, who's an oil engineer retired from steel mills. And one day he discovered this amazing map. We called the red map initially. This is the inversion of it. It was actually red. We think it's kind of like a lithograph type thing to make copies of it. So using that as the extent of the area that we're going to look at, we developed this project from there. So this area is down by the Cavelli Center in the whole east end of downtown. So we first wanted to start with the beginning. George Higley, in an intimate history of Youngstown, stated that the reason why John Young selected this area for downtown Youngstown is because previous generations of Native Americans had burnt land for corn production. And then once John Young bought the land off of the Connecticut Land Company, and settlement began here. What really, and this gets into my project next too, what really put Youngstown on the map and allowed for the development of industry through here was the Pennsylvania and Ohio Canal, which links Youngstown right between Pittsburgh and Cleveland to be able to connect to the Ohio and Erie Canal in Akron, and also to be able to go down the Beaver River to Manapta, where you could go to Pittsburgh from there. So really put Youngstown on the map for iron production. And so some of the first to work with that in this area were the Wicks opened up a rolling mill down in the area we're looking at along the Honing. Cavelli Center is right about here currently. So 1846, the Wicks opened up a rolling mill, and although they certainly proved successful in business later on, the first venture was a failure. It's kind of interesting looking at the records of that, that they're talking about like the rusted old steel mills or iron mills being abandoned. So it's kind of like foreshadowing deindustrialization, but this is back in the late 1840s. So they bring in the Browns and Bonnell from Newcastle. They had an iron foundry in Newcastle that burned down. And so their initial plan was to bring, it's amazing how they moved factories around those days, but they were going to deconstruct it and move to Newcastle. The Wicks said no, if they're going to buy it, they have to keep it here. So that kept production here in Youngstown. 1850s, the Phoenix and the Falcon furnace. Here's South Avenue Bridge now, either side of, in those days it was Presque Isle Bridge, that predates the Market Street Bridge. But either side of that bridge, you have the Phoenix furnace, and you have the Falcon furnace on the other side. So what this mapping map was all about was the sale of Brown Bonnell to Republic, which was forming Republic Steel. So 1899, 1900, James Mackey, son of one of the earliest pioneers of Youngstown, develops the Mackey map to plot the parcels being sold. It gets sold to Republic, and shortly thereafter, because the iron production those days, and we have a lot of this, as Brooke will talk about soon in the virtual exhibit, it was skilled labor puddling in those days, whereas Republic is then moving using the Bessemer process to large mass quantities of steel in a much more unskilled labor process. And this really gets to the heart of Chris and Matt's work, but also previous students' work, Laura Rockamell, who documented using the census data that in the neighborhood around Emily Alley, that this was a residential neighborhood. Actually, let me backtrack to the previous. That in the Brown Bonnell days, this was a residential neighborhood. So using the census data, we documented the residents around here and tried to find what information we could on them. But there was a big transition in moving to the more unskilled labor process of the steel mills. And so that's when you see a lot more like Eastern European immigration coming through here, more unskilled laborers. Whereas looking at the census data, a lot of the original puddlers were more skilled labor, a lot of like Welsh immigrants. And then in 1916, that whole residential neighborhood around Emily Alley is torn down to make way for a B&O railroad freight yard. So here we have georeference maps of the 1950 census with a 1968 blueprint of the whole Republic plant, which is also from the YHCL archives here. And then, of course, 84, Republic Steel closes down, and for a long time, this is abandoned down here in the early 2000s. The funds were secured by Congressman James Traffic in part to build the Cavelli Center down in this area here. So here we're looking at in deindustrialization or post-industrialization era. And then finally, in the past couple of years, you see this develop into the amphitheater now, and we have these walking paths here. And to speak about this whole process, and we are blessed to have them with us here today. Wayne and Dorothy had a conversation. Dorothy Butler and Wayne Judah walked around down here and had a conversation about the history of the area.
Was built originally by the Wicks, by Hugh Bryson Wick, I believe. He built a rolling mill in 1854.
So it's 22-minute video, and I invite you all to watch it on the virtual exhibit. And so finally then, and this is kind of going to lead into my presentation next, the goal for the future, and that is advocating for the Mahoning River Greenway hike and bike trail to connect through here, utilize these walking paths. And also this side of South Avenue between Crab Creek and the South Avenue Bridge. This land is actually owned by Youngstown Tube Company, and Bill Berry, president of Youngstown Tube, was kind of come in December and talk with us and see our research up to that point, and he was telling us his plans of expanding eventually operations and building two factories down here as part of Youngstown Tube operation. He says there's still plenty of room for a trail to go through and historic interpretation. So the goal ultimately with a project like this is to actually install historic interpretation along it and using partly this research to do it. And once again, Brooke Wagner to talk about the virtual exhibit of which this map is a part of. Also, just to share real quick, so this was a story map of ArcGIS. There is also a web map, which is a little more comprehensive. You can play a lot more with the layers, and it's the same true with my project coming up next as well. That
Well, Jacob's working, if I could just insert, we did not take into consideration when we were working what this area might be like if there were 138,000 kilovolt line arcing over it.
That's Leary.
So yeah, with the web map, you can play with all the different layers, and you can click individually on each of the different structures where we have the information that we can gather upon. Yeah, that's all there on the virtual exhibit, which now Brooke will talk about.
Okay, so as this class was sort of like part 2 to the fall class, I came into this project completely unaware of all the research that Jacob, Chris, and Matt had previously conducted. So to sort of catch myself up on what they wanted to do with all their information they gathered, I conducted my own research, but then as I was getting their research in, I developed the virtual exhibit, which is now available on the museum's website, to kind of display side by side all of our information. So the virtual exhibit touches a little bit on what Jacob mentions in his story map. So what he doesn't mention, I mention. What I don't mention, he'll mention. So it kind of goes hand in hand. But my job was to develop the virtual exhibit with everything that we've gathered, not only last semester, but this semester, which is what I did with this digital exhibit. I've broken it down into 3 sections: industrial, residential, and transportation, to kind of trace how it's changed over the past several decades. And then with the help of Jacob and his drone, we are able to get really nice aerial footage of the area as it looks now. So that's also included on the digital exhibit.
Also, thank you to Steel Valley Artifacts for this photograph, and the Mahoning Valley Historical Society for this photograph. These are the colors at Brown Bunnell, a group photo taken in 1883.
Yeah. But what's nice about these virtual exhibits is that they can be expanded upon. So even after all 4 of us are out of here, well, me and Jacob are graduating, but after all of us are gone, these can be expanded upon. So as more research and information comes in, they can be added to the virtual exhibits as well to kind of keep them up to date. But yes.
Here's a unique combination of 2 elements to be found. One, well, Dr. Leary had this video of one of the last times iron puddling was performed on a large scale function. And also this book called Pierre Domain in America Steel, and it talks about the puddling process. So Dr. Leary read about the puddling process, and then we layered that over top of the video.
When 20 minutes out of the 30 had gone by, painstakingly pulled down on the long lever that raised the working door. The pigs had to be turned over on their other side. Then down again with the door, and a piece of plate popped up over even the small porthole, a shovelful of cinder thrown around the plate to seal the hearth up tight. Almost to the minute, when the half hour was up, the pigs had melted into a white hot brew. He noticed that Haynes did not need to look at the clock. Haynes opened the hole in the door, thrust in the bar with the hook on the end. The gravel and then began to stir. For 8 or 10 minutes now, the temperature had to be kept as high as he could get it in the firebox. 2,600 degrees, Haynes said. At the end of that time, the iron had cleared of silicon that meant. It was the trickiest stage in the whole process. You had to be able to gauge precisely when that stage was complete. He watched over the old man's shoulder, dodging the backward sweep of the rabble, until he became familiar with the sight of the curiously pale blue, almost phosphorescent wake left by the rabble in the incandescent rock. As nearly as he could tell, it was the only sign by which Haynes knew that the silicon was gone. Now the time had come to shovel the roll scale into the hearth. Haynes did that, as he did nearly everything himself during the first 2 days. Then the draft had to be all but cut off. What was wanted was a lowering of the temperature to get rid of the phosphorus. He knew that much from the metallurgy books. The low boil, it was called. The molten iron and the slag thickened as they cooled. They were harder to ravel now. He could see the sweat pouring down Haynes' back. 10 minutes of that, then the last stage began. The roll scale had fused with the white pasty mass. The reaction of oxidizing out the phosphorus had raised the temperature in the hearth again. Haynes reveled furiously, his body as if one with the long iron rod. 20 minutes, the stirring went on, and with every minute, the brew in the hearth boiled more violently, increased in bulk as if floated by yeast, rose and rose in the hearth until the slag overflowed and ran out the small hole in the door into the slag buggy below. This was the carbon, the last impurity still left in the iron being released. One could see the bubbles of carbon monoxide exploding on the surface of the vat, burning with a blue flame. Then the boiling all but stopped. The liquid suddenly calmed. Little incandescent globules appeared on top, pure iron at last, and still Haynes had to stir. If the brilliant drops of iron were allowed to remain on top, they would become oxidized too and burn up. They had to be covered in the bath of slag. Nor could the iron be allowed to settle on the bottom of the hearth. What was needed was that the thousands of tiny drops of iron become coated with slag. That too he had learned from his books. And while Haynes kneaded and worked the pasty mass, he had to open the draft, tend the fire again, raise the temperature. 10 more minutes, Haynes worked to knead a great doughy lump. Then he divided that into 2 balls, ready now for the squeezer. When he pulled down on the lever and raised the door, Haynes reached in with the long tongs, seized one of the balls, swung it out, stiff-leggedly rushed it up the aisle. Then the second ball, an hour and a half for 600 pounds of wrought iron. Now they were ready for another heat.
That shows it going through the squeezer to get out the excess slag to make wrought iron. But then that whole process, as we mentioned, was replaced by the Western steel process with Republic when it went in.
Okay, yeah, so as I said, this is available on the museum's website, so we hope you check it out. Thank you.
And then I just got my project up next. Just give me 1 second and we will set the stage for that. I'll go first.
I'd like to thank again Ms. Bishop, Dr. Wilson, and Dr. Leary for the help that they gave us this year with the project. And of course, Jacob, who's been working on this for longer than I've been alive, so.
All right. Here we now have the Mahoney Movement Master's Presentation.
Space and time. Space and time. Space and time. Space and time. Space and time.
We're now going from the Mahoney River Greenway to the Steel Museum.
Space and time.
streets of downtown Youngstown. The old Cedars, that's currently being renovated. The final images of the old church before it was torn down over there. Here we are coming into this very room, the very Michelle classroom. And here is my story. So, sorry for the actors. All right, so once again, this is an ArcGIS story map. So unlike a PowerPoint presentation, all these maps are interactive. So if you do go on the website, mahoneymovement.com, you too can play with this presentation and the various maps. And there's toggle actions on them. So here's the whole point of the project, is that to the east of us is the Savage Bike Trail, which goes from Newcastle to Struthers, Ohio. Which then, we are the missing gap between Struthers, Youngstown, Warren, Leavittsburg, to then in Ravenna, you have the Portage County Hike and Bike Trail, which will then take you all the way to Akron. And so traveling on those trails, there's a couple of historical markers along the way, which alert you that it is also the previous route of the Ohio-Erie Canal. So I'm just gonna do this one. Okay. So I started working on this project and realized, like, hey, we're the missing link to actually connect the region, because also once you get to Akron, you have the old Ohio and Erie Canal, which will take you all the way up to Cleveland or take you south to New Philadelphia. Also, when you get to Pittsburgh, you have the Greater Allegheny Passage, which then takes you to Cumberland, Maryland, where then you can take the old C&O Canal towpath to Washington, D.C. So this missing link in these active transportation hike and bike trails were really the missing link in not just linking the region, but really the nation west of the Mississippi, east of the Atlantic, south of the Great Lakes, and north of the Ohio River. So that's what got this project started. And then through Dr. Leary and through the Applied History program, learning about heritage areas, the National Park Service's heritage areas, that Congressman Tim Ryan proposed in 2019, the Steel Valley National Heritage Area. And so it made perfect sense that if you had the Steel Valley National Heritage Area to actually have historic and cultural interpretation along the trail, then not only are you able to link the region through transportation, but you're also able to tell the history and culture of it all. And so in thinking about us being the missing link, just as we were in the canal system, and looking at other historical maps to realize that transportation in the region could go back as far as 30,000 years. You know, just recently, presence of people in North America has been documented as far back as 20,000 years, and there's a lot of debate how far back it really goes. So I wanted to start by recentering ourselves, not in relation to European expansion, but through documented Native American sites. And to start with, let's go all the way out west by the Mississippi River to Cahokia, which is the largest of the Native American mounds discovered in North America. And rather than latest research is that it wasn't so much a political capital, but it was a kind of like an event center, and it aligns, there was like a wooden Stonehenge, actually called Woodhenge, which documents the astrological calendar and when the solstices are. So there's Cahokia. Then if we go to where West Virginia and Pennsylvania and Ohio meet, there is a site, it's actually operated by the Heinz History Center, but it's the Meadowcroft Rock Shelter. And so a historical marker at Meadowcroft Rock Shelter says a deeply stratified archaeological site. Its deposits span nearly 16,000 years. Meadowcroft revealed North America's earliest known evidence of human presence and the New World's largest sequence of human occupation. So it's a significant site because if you look at some of the early archaeological and historical speculation is, in the racist mentality back in the day, a lot of people said, oh, these Native American mounds or these mounds couldn't even be built by Native Americans. It had to be a lost race of white people coming over here. So this site itself, significantly disproves that for being in continual use. Then let's go to Newark, Ohio. And there's another, I got to visit here like about a month ago, and it's amazing the collection of sites around here. So one of which is Flint Ridge, which here is the historical marker there. For more than 10,000 years, Flint Ridge was one of the most important flint quarries in eastern North America. The flint formed at the bottom of a shallow ocean 300 million years ago. The softer rocks surrounding the flint have washed away, leaving the hard flint exposed near the surface. Prehistoric people came here to quarry the flint, which they crafted into a variety of stone tools. Hundreds of quarry pits and workshops are scattered for miles along this ridge. The beautiful rainbow-colored flint was especially prized by the Hopewell culture that built the nearby Newark earthworks. Artifacts crafted from Flint Ridge may be found throughout eastern North America. In more recent times, local industries quarried the flint for use as grindstones. So you got Flint Ridge there. There's also Blackham Gorge, and there's a nice trail that goes through there. There was a petroglyph through here that unfortunately was blown up when the B&O Railroad blasted through the rock to make the rail line in. Then in Granville, and as also a coincidence or not of this project, the first interurban line, which we'll get to talk about the interurbans, the first interurban line, one of the very first ones, went between Granville and Newark. But here in Granville, you have the Alligator Mound, not as famous as the other Ohio animal effigy mound, the Serpent Mound, but this is the Alligator Mound. It's on a beautiful ridge overlooking a vast area of the Licking River. And then in Newark itself is the largest of man-made earthworks in the world. I think it's kind of funny, it almost kind of reminds you of the new Apple campus, which we're using a lot of Apple products here, but it kind of reminds you of the new headquarters at Apple built. There's a perfect circle, and it's earthworks. Of course, the early archaeologists, assumed it had to be some kind of fort, but of course it didn't make sense having the moat on the inside. But now that's disproven it wasn't a fort, it was actually more likely a ceremonial gathering space. But these earthworks are huge and expand the whole city and connect to. There's currently a golf course that preserves the rest of the earthworks on the more western side of Newark. But originally, it encompassed this entire area of Newark, Ohio. And then if you look at the 1914 Ohio Archaeological Atlas that traces the known Native American paths, you can see it takes you right there from around Newark. There's multiple paths, but they extend all the way to our area here. Most specifically, and one of the first things to put the area on the map as valued resources was the Salt Licks, which also give their Mahoning its name. So the paths, so we're looking at a transportation network that connected all these various sites to bring us right here to Youngstown. So the Salt Springs, the historical marker for that is actually, here's the Salt Springs here. The historical marker is actually closer to the intersection of Route 46 and Salt Springs Road. It's right by a cemetery. Here's the historical marker for that. In February 1788, Connecticut, which asserted ownership of the Western Reserve from the colonial period to 1795, deeded the Salt Spring Tract to Samuel Holden Parsons, a pioneer of the Northwest Territory and former Continental Army officer. In 1796, Reuben Harmon, an early settler, what became Wethersfield Township, purchased the springs. Although new settlers initially considered the springs an asset, the salinity of the water was too low to make the salt production profitable. In 1903, railroad tracks covered the once famous salt springs. Mahoning is said to be derived from the Lenape word Mahone, meaning at the salt. And here is the area itself. So the railroad track starts to the left here, and you can, and the spring runs right over to the right, and leads into the Mahoning. So in early maps, right here we're looking at a georeference, which means we take the historic map and layer it over top of current imagery and use control points to do that. So the best method that I found to use is to really follow the rivers and mark the confluence points, especially when the two rivers meet. And so I georeference this map, and the salt springs are listed on this map. But this is from 1764, Thomas Hutchins' map of Bouquet's expedition. So Bouquet's expedition, this is still, remember, under the British. It's on the Ohio Historical Society website, really good telling of it all. But there was a pan-Native American uprising. Remember, the Native American wasn't one group of people, but we had multiple nations, multiple tribes, multiple groups with their own identity. So in the face of Western European expansion, they banded together. So Tecumseh was a great leader in that. For him, Pontiac. So this is actually put down Pontiac's rebellion. And so Colonel Bouquet, the British Army officer, taken with a huge military force and forced Native Americans to cede their land. But what's interesting is that the captives, which included various European settlers, but also African Americans, that Bouquet brought them back and forced them to come with them, but a lot of them wanted to return to the Native American groups that they adopted and became part of. So it's interesting to think that they escaped back outside of the British territory. And then you have Heckler. He was a Moravian missionary who sought to convert Native Americans to Christianity, and he hand drew this map, which is surprisingly relatively accurate for being hand drawn and not being a photographer. But so I georeferenced that map as well, which kind of distorts it, but will show you where the different sites are. And I think it'd be useful as well to utilize for archaeological digs and whatnot. The old Mahoning town that was listed on here, I believe, has never been discovered as to where the exact spot was. Which brings us to the early Western Reserve. So after Bouquet, of course, Native Americans ceded their land, and then General Cleveland, working as a private agent for the Connecticut Land Company, after he got the other Native Americans who had claims to the land to cede the land, that paved the way for Connecticut, which claimed the land thanks to King Charles II, who said that Connecticut could claim all the way to the Pacific Ocean without any idea where that actually was. So Connecticut claimed this area in northeast Ohio to become part of the early Western Reserve. And so it was truly the frontier in those days, the western frontier of the United States. But, and here's a little commercial for another one of our projects, some of those structures survive today. And Dr. Leary and Chris Klingmeyer instructed the class that Brooke and I were also part of last semester that document early architecture of the Western Reserve. So this is a whole nother virtual exhibit that we also videographed each of the classes, and we broke it down into each episode, but also into each structure that we looked at. So feel free to look at that too. So like I said, it's the frontier roads that existed were pretty beat up, and there's one story of two guys left Connecticut. One went up along the North Trail along the Great Lakes and down Youngstown. The other one went through Pennsylvania, and they both arrived on the same day 3 months later. So travel was very difficult, but the cutting edge of those days was canals. And so even George Washington, advocated for a national canal network to extend all the way to the Mahoning Valley. The Ohio and Leary Canal running from Cleveland down to Portsmouth, Ohio. And then you have the Pennsylvania Canal to the east of us that connected Pittsburgh to Philadelphia. And so the idea is that to connect those two together here through the Mahoning Valley. And it was the Pennsylvania Canal, Ohio Canal to do that. And let's go now to Ravenna to see where the critical water gap between the Mahoning and Cuyahoga was bridged. Standing here on the corner of Prospect and Summit in Ravenna, Ohio, and that is no mistake. Prospect Street here is the high elevation point between the two watersheds, the Cuyahoga and the Mahoning. Taking the Cuyahoga watershed, take you all the way to Cleveland, Great Lakes, down St. Lawrence Seaway, all the way out to the Gulf of St. Lawrence. You go the other way, you take the Mahoning, that will take you down to the Beaver, take you down to the Ohio, Amanatha, and upriver you got Pittsburgh, go downriver you got Cincinnati, meet up with the Mississippi, and go down to New Orleans. So bridging these two water gaps has been an important aspect of humans going through here for thousands of years. And in 1840, it was finally done. Let's go check out where. Obviously, with this county being named Portage in the early Western Reserve by Connecticut, that the divide between these watersheds is well known. But even way before that, for the Native Americans, up that way in Towner's Park, you have the Hopewell Indian Mound, and then that way is the Salt Licks that gave Mahoning its name. And then took to the poppies, or frenzy to boxes. We'll get a second to buffer. Darn internet here. Completely in an ancient. Was finally accomplished in 1840. Before that, 1831, another watershed was added to the list of these two, this would connect. And that was when the canal, mainline canal, was completed between Pittsburgh and Philadelphia. And ironically enough, and as a foreshadow of things to come, it was a rail line that bridged that went over the Alleghenies to connect the two parts of the canal to take it between Pittsburgh and Philadelphia. So this was the critical area to connect Cleveland and Pittsburgh. And it went right here through Ravenna. And after the canal ended, it was filled in to make this rail line, which is still in use today. So that building right over here to the left, that's now torn down. But kind of like the grittier, like deindustrialized south end of Ravenna, a lot of, now with deindustrialization units, a lot of that area is kind of crumbling or being torn down. But so I never really expected to do much science coming back to YSU to get my master's, but sure enough, taking these math classes, ArcGIS, and under Dr. Brad Sheldo, I had to do some science as part of it all. So what was interesting is this is using hydrological study to find that divide between, where is the exact divide between the Mahoning watershed and the Cuyahoga watershed. And sure enough, doing the hydrological analysis, it showed right along Summit Avenue, so there's no mistaking at some of these street names. So, here's the 1828 E&O survey map. As you can see, it connected Newcastle through Youngstown, through Girard, Niles, Warren, Leavensburg, to Ravenna, Kent, all the way to Akron. And here you can see the Ohio Leary Canal. And also, we have the Pennsylvania Canal and the C&O Canal. So here we are in the 1840, and in a way, the nation is united. But obviously, we know it was also divided at that time. And so I also wanted to examine the Underground Railroad as a transportation network. And in a way, it's kind of like the anti-transportation network. So obviously, a lot of these transportation networks are established through government action. In a way, it's just it's the inverse of that. It was largely the fugitive slave laws, which allowed for capture of those seeking freedom, escaping slavery, to be returned wherever slave catchers could find them between here and Canada. But luckily, those seeking freedom and their abolitionist allies doubled down and made the network even more robust, even though the penalties became much higher with the law of 1852. Also, it's like the anti-transportation network in the sense is you don't want to have infrastructure. You don't want to leave any kind of trace of traveling. And so here is William Siebert's, who was an Ohio historian, but really it was one of the first official, historians to document the Underground Railroad, which he did out of Columbus, Ohio. And so you can see it's interesting just to layer the network with current transportation networks. But what really helped shape, thinking of that in this project is this proposed Mahoning River Greenway would intersect with the Western Reserve Greenway, which takes you all the way up to Ashtabula. And on the way to Ashtabula, there are some really great historical information panels, this being one of them. So we click on another random one right here. And so these are also all documented on the web map we can look at. And they should be pretty high resolution, so you could actually zoom in and read all the text. But so these panels document the Underground Railroad going through the area and leading all the way up in Ashtabula to Hubbard House, which was a known safe house to await being able to go to Canada. And so, looking at this, and also Dr. Fluke is here, thank you for coming. She gave a couple presentations. I didn't have a class with her, but she came as a guest lecturer at different classes. And so one of the things she talked about was the different perspectives of looking at the Civil War, the lost cause Southern perspective, which doesn't deserve much credence, the Union perspective, which is to preserve the nation, which you can see that as like Abraham Lincoln's perspective on it, to keep the nation united. But then you have the emancipationist perspective in that this was a war to end slavery. And if you look at it from that perspective, it didn't start with Fort Sumter. It started with really guerrilla warfare in the sense of the Underground Railroad, and of course culminating with John Brown, who also was active in this area, and some of these panels document that, but culminated in John Brown's raid on Harper's Ferry. So I like to think of it as that perspective, that the Civil War started with that, with those who had the courage to fight against slavery. Then that brings us to the Civil War, and trains played a big part of it. One of the things I read that theorized that one of the reasons why the South lost the war is because of the way the northern railroad lines were much better organized, and Lincoln seized control of it to make sure they operated efficiently during the war, whereas the southern rail lines were all a mess because you had different gauges of track and whatnot. So after the Civil War, it was kind of clear the canals were on their way out and the railroad age had begun. And so even here, our Pennsylvania and Ohio Canal was filled in by the Mahoning Railroad Company to become rail line in 1877. As part of the rail revolution, you didn't just have steam engines, which then later went to diesel engines. You also had interurban lines, which were electric rails. So, I mean, an all-electric and affordable people mover connecting communities between Chicago and Pittsburgh. It sounds futuristic, but was very real from late 1800s to early 1900s. And so the Savage Trail runs exactly on that interurban track. And then to the west of us, it went all the way to Ravenna and then connected on. So this is a 1920 map of the interurban network. And then finally, and I talk about, I wrote a thesis too as part of this project too, in which I talk about that active transportation is necessary for a number of reasons, but also that so much of our policy planning and lives in the past 70 years have been so automobile centric. And whereas all these other methods of transportation really connected communities, the interstate highway system and all these expressways, in a way they divided communities. So here, this was kind of a last minute thing I put together, but I geo-referenced, I stitched together all these 1950 sandboard individual maps to make one cohesive map. This is Youngstown 1950. Just nearby us, right here, here's West Federal, now Martin Luther King Boulevard, Westlake Terrace here. And we toggle, it shows where the expressway goes through now. Now, obviously, we've had a declining population for a while, and we lost a lot of properties around town. But when the expressway was built, a lot of the thriving neighborhood was demolished before even that decline. So here you can just see with the sandboard maps where a lot of the structures were in relation to what were tore out to make the Madison Avenue Expressway. So that brings us into actually looking at the trail itself from east to west. And that's where it gets more fun too, in that courtesy of the geography department, and thank you, Dr. Donna Cerny as well, we have these oculuses. And so what I did is I wore a 360 GoPro to document not just the current trails, but also the proposed Mahoning River Reway. So these are 360 videos. So if you wear the Oculus headset, you can turn around in all directions, and everyone after this is welcome to try it out. There I am there riding a bicycle. So this is the Savage Trail here. And once again on the map, we have all the different points of interest. And this is another aspect that really kind of or at least gave me kind of idea of this whole project, is at the start of the Savage Trail, you have this marker that documents the past 400 years history, that 1600 Seneca Nation hunting ground, 1700 Delaware Nation homeland, 1838, though it didn't open until 1840, Prospect Canal passed just below the spot. 1860 replaced by the P&LE railbed. 1889 electric trolley lines followed present bike trail path. And in 1983, the Savage Trail was established. And then getting to where 422 passes over, I'm sorry, 224 passes over the Mahoning River. On the one side of the river, just above the Savage Trail, you have a historical marker talking about the canal there. how it connected Pittsburgh to Cleveland through our area. And then on the other side of the river, you have the Native American site of Kuskuskis. And Kuskuskis town, of this group of towns, the last one occupied by the Indians stood near here in 1785, when General William Irving tore the donation lands just before their division of tracts given to the Revolutionary War soldiers. So yeah, after the Revolutionary War, the new nation didn't have the land to really pay the soldiers, so they gave a lot of land out this way. Really not accounting for Native Americans who lived there as well, but gave these lands. And so right behind Kuskuskis then, you have a cemetery where some Native American, or some Revolutionary War soldiers are buried, including John Ashton. And so continuing along the trail, take you right to Struthers. Here's Lowville. And then here finally is the established trailhead. Then next, this is where we get to the proposed Mahoning River Greenway. And it was pretty serendipitous starting to work on this project while also seeing Eastgate Regional Council of Governments, and Justin, thank you for being here, also seeing that Eastgate Regional Council of Governments was at the same time looking at the Mahoning River Corridor Plan and soliciting suggestions from the community as to what do you think the river should look like. So I submitted things like, hey, I just started working on this project. We really need to connect these bike paths. And so MS Consultants was contracted to do the work for them. So in December of 2020, I presented a very rudimentary form of this project to MS Consultants, and I think they incorporated, at least they said that they incorporated part of it into the proposal for the Mahoning River Greenway. So then that became official just, what was it, October, November this past year, that it's official that Eastgate is proposing a river corridor revitalization plan. And as part of that, to have the Mahoning River Greenway. So it might actually really happen. So Justin was also nice enough to share the exact proposed line, because I had speculated where I thought, you know, the best way to do it was, but luckily they also had a map. So I was able to follow their suggested trail, which worked out pretty good. So next we have from that trail, from the established trail to Youngstown. And since it's not a trail yet, this is where it gets to be a little more hard traveling. Let's see. Well, we can show you on the audience, but so there's the 360 video of that. And then the introduction video going from the proposed greenway to the Steel Museum. And also I did another one going to the Knox building downtown. And then after Youngstown, we got Youngstown to Girard. And Girard to Niles. And this is a fun area here. So you have McDonald Steel here. As was discussed earlier, it's still an active mill. But this area behind the old golf dome, which Dan Martini, thank you for joining us. He was started off originally at the golf dome there. So we're behind the golf dome down here between the golf dome and the Mahoning River. And so it really is already trails, and you get a lot of ATV riders through here. It's funny, if you watch the video, there's like some kids having like a fire down there and stuff. And they made fun of my leather vest. There it is. And then this was from Niles to Warren. This was some hard travel here. So right by Waddell Park, there's an abandoned rail corridor here, which it's pretty relatively recently abandoned. You can see like the brush is growing up around it, and it's just barely impassable. So hopefully this plan goes through soon before it's too overgrown. But so yeah, if you watch the video of that, you have like branches hitting in the face and whatnot. And then going from, here we are getting into Warren. And as we talked earlier about where they tore down RG steel. Actually, this is old satellite imagery. It still shows it. But now that's literally a brownfield. But across the river, you still have the coke plant operating. Like, so here's a picture of, it's all like literally brownfield now, but the guard booth is still there. Warren to Leavittsburg, and Leavittsburg is really nice. I also have a little side jaunt here to Canoe City there, which is gonna be real nice when they remove the dam there, which will make it a lot better for kayakers. The ultimate goal is to have both a greenway for hike and bike, but also making the river a blueway to make it safer for water transportation. Leavittsburg to Braceville to Newton Falls, which, Newton Falls is a significant area because that's where the Mahoning River, where the East Branch and West Branch converge to form the Mahoning River. And of course, you have all these dams here which form these reservoirs. West Branch State Park, also Lake Milton down there. So we follow along the path, take us to West Branch State Park. And you'd think it being a state park, it would be one of the easiest places to get through, but really it actually is one of the most difficult. You have to kind of like, in making your own path through it, you have to follow along where there's some other high tension lines through there. And then finally, to make it around this gully here, just simply follow the rail track into Ravenna. So we make it into Ravenna. And then from there, it's smooth sailing, because that's where the Portage County hike and bike trail begins. But it's cool, you can see, as you can see, like right at the beginning of the trail, you can see behind you is abandoned rail line, whereas in front of you, you have a perfectly paved trail. And it turns out the railroad still hasn't sold that track to incorporate. But once they do, from Braceville to Ravenna, you could have two different paths. One to go along West Branch, and the other one going above Garfield military base to get to Ravenna. And then past Kent, the Portage County Hike and Bike Trail turns into the Freedom Trail, which takes you all the way to Akron. And then from Akron, that's where you can take the Ohio and Leary Canal towpath to Cleveland or South New Philadelphia. And in Massillon along the way, that's where you could pick up Ohio, they call it the Ohio to Erie bike trail, which takes you all the way to Cincinnati, which I did in 2020. So yeah, that's about it. So after that, we could play with the oculuses and see what it's like in 360. Please eat some food as well. The Chang family was nice enough to sponsor the reception, and also Trina Williams from Freshman Catering was nice enough to make some food, and my mom made cookies too. So. Thank you. If you have any questions or questions for anybody in the group or for any of the projects, please feel free to ask away. But yeah, hope you have a good time. Same question.